Okay, people. Hope everyone is well. Well, I'm very excited to be here. I'm again doing another installment of promotion of my most recent book here called How Non-Being Haunts Being, subtitled on Possibilities, Morality, and Death Acceptance. And there's so much that I want to say about the book. I'm just so excited about it, but it's a very difficult project here to be reaching out to people. And let's see if I can talk about that a little bit. And then I'm also trying to talk about some ideas that aren't in the book, but are maybe related there in the background and see if I can get maybe some conversation started from that. I think the first thing that I would say is that it's an expensive book. And so that's very frustrating to me. I mean, I did want it to be included in this particular University Press series. I liked the series and I thought it was a good fit. I, I'm just, it's irritating me that it's so expensive. Please, I'm going to post a link below to a directory of libraries across the country. Go to your local library. It's easy to find their number. Just call and get the book there. I would love to have people buy the book. I will be able to put a promotional code there for 30% off at the publisher. You can get it at, any bookstore. But I think, if it's too expensive, just get it in your library. That would be wonderful for me. Again, if you want to see it and take a sniff at it, or poke around at it, I'm happy to hear insights, observations, criticisms, anything at all. Just an engagement would be wonderful. Okay, I guess it's a tough book for me to sell because I think people know this about my channel, right? I'm somewhat homeless. Right. I really don't have a well-established home in a lot of ways. That I'm not religious or churchy enough for most spiritual people because I don't believe in life after death. But I'm not atheistic enough for the atheist crowd because I do have some notion of, I'll call it, divine source and ultimate mystery, that there will be this question of where did all this stuff come from. And you don't need religious dogma. You don't need life after death or God, some being who's an entity who could intervene, who answers prayers. You don't need any of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that atheism is true. Or I guess just for so many people, I mean, that's just the simplest way to say it. For so many people, the religion question is basically the afterlife question. It's hard to get people to even be in the right ballpark if you say, yeah, I don't believe in life after death at all. When you're dead, you're dead. But I'm not an atheist. I don't really think that there isn't something miraculous about this, or that there isn't some legitimate claim to the mystery about how all this started, where it came from, and what that would all mean. And it doesn't have to mean an intelligent design. I think people hear what they have a quick criticism for on the other side. And I'm so easily pushed one way or the other. And I think, again, that I don't think the book is, I think someone, if they take the time to read the book, I think they'd see there is a pretty, there's a big wide expanse there for positions, especially as you move toward, non-dogmatic orientations toward what is all of this. I think there's a tendency both in a kind of materialistic reductive science to liquidate it one way, in the same way there is with this sort of dogmatic religious, everything is transcendence and it's all, in the mind of God kind of stuff. This kind of radical idealism. I think there are ways to find a position between that's grounded in a kind of, I guess it would be the dovetailing of some of the physical sciences, the relationship between chemistry and biology, and in early forms of evolution that's pre-Darwinian evolution. So symbiotic relationships and all the various forms of symbiotic relationships that formed, as the nucleated cell was beginning and multicellularity became possible. I mean, to me, that's a very interesting area of evolutionary biology. And I guess, on the other hand, it's the other dimension is all of the range of communication technologies that have bore upon the particular experience that we have right now as consciousness. So we're conscious in a certain way. We have a certain conscious experience. And so when we ask about what sentience is or what consciousness is, I think we can ask it and try to mean different things, but it's almost impossible, perhaps it is impossible, to bracket off all of the different ways that consciousness that we're experiencing has become what it has by way of countless communication technologies. Language, alphabetacy, forms of print writing rather than just manuscript writing, all the different ways that clocks, calendars, monetary systems. There's just so many different ways that communication systems have altered, shaped, and given form to that particular consciousness that we now experience, so that when we ask about consciousness in a general way, it's hard to know exactly what it is we mean by that. Because when we use the word, we have a tendency to smuggle in so many of those dynamics that have become what they've become because of our exposure to clocks, calendars, mirrors, the telegraph, the telephone, forms of new media, I guess, here as well. Okay, so again, the plea here is, contact your local library, check it out. If you can't afford the book, I understand it's an expensive book. Get your local library to get it. I would love to get some reading groups going. I think it would be really fun to have people read it, and I'm happy to have people come at me with pitchforks. I would try to withstand all criticisms. That's okay. I'm happy to hear it. I would just like to hear what people have to say about some of the arguments, because I do think there is a middle space. I think there's a robust space for agency. See, I think that's part of the argument that I'm going for here. It's that some folks, and it's about agency. I think for some folks, agency is epiphenomenal. It's illusory, that we're sort of ping pong balls on water, and any action that you take or any behavior you take is something like an after effect of various causal forces that led you into that situation to begin with, led you into that kind of response. And in some way, like the hardline reductive materialist argument, it just liquidates agency. It liquidates any claim to being a deliberative, reflective, decision-making agent, right? Sort of says freedom is BS. Now, maybe there are compatibilists, and I guess obviously I'm a form of compatibilist, but I think on the other hand, the other dogma I'm trying to cut against. So the one dogma is there is no such thing as agency; it's all epiphenomenal or illusory. The other is, you do have freedom because it was given to you on high from God, and God is just giving you a test to see how much you can obey him and love him. And again, your free will is it also makes the freedom of free will, it's predicated on some sort of illusion, right? So whereas in science, the sense that you have a free will is kind of the illusion, whereas in the religious dogma, it's something like, no, the free will is ultimately real, but this world is an illusion, and the real important part comes after in the afterlife, something like that. Or it's only to be understood in terms of the afterlife. Perhaps they wouldn't deny the reality of this life, but suggest that it's not as important as the ultimate, which is eternal damnation, eternal salvation, and this sort of stuff in various religious dogma. And so what I thought I'd do then is, rather than, again, talk about the book, I did post some videos about the book more directly. I gave some talks recently. You can go look at some of those. I thought I would talk about some ideas that I've had, I guess, since writing the book. It just came out like maybe 6 months ago, and it was stalled out due to COVID for over a year. So I feel in some way it feels like the book was written a couple of years ago. But I've had some thoughts about some of the things that are in there that I would maybe like add as an addendum. And hopefully, if these make sense to you, I'd love for you to go check the book out, right? If you want to, you can send me an email and I will send you a little promotional snippet. It's about 30 pages that has a little selection from chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if that would help you decide whether or not you'd want to get a library copy or even purchase a copy, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so I think here's a couple of ways to come at some of the concerns I guess I'm having, increasingly after I've written it now. And I'm going to sort of talk about dogma here for a second. I want to get at religious dogma and kind of poke at that. And I guess both of these are kind of poking at religious dogma. But it's funny when you go out in the world and you try to figure this out. You look out there, and there are all of these bishops and cardinals and priests and deacons and pastors, clergymen, and it's unbelievable. The number of people who are employed, and there's a hierarchical arrangement of all of these different religious folks who, I guess, they're there and they're haggling about various parts of religious dogma, about, was it God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit? Is it a Trinity? Is it three people? Is it two? Somehow there's no God the Mother. There's no God the Mother. There's God the Father, God the Son. And then it's funny, you talk with people and, you say, was Jesus white? And I've actually heard people say, well, yeah, Jesus was white, and I'm like, well, okay, some of this is very difficult. And then I say, is God white? And then, literally, I've had people say to me, well, of course God is white. If Jesus was white, why wouldn't God be white? I mean, God would have a son similar to himself. It's so funny. You start to ask these questions about what is going on in this belief system. But again, you go back to this, there are just this ridiculous stuff. They're going to argue about angels and demons and all these different things that are there. And, is it goodwill? Is it predestination? What are the things that you need to, I guess, earn your place in heaven? And what would be the things that you would do to try to avoid, being eternally damned or something like this? And I think the more you look at it, all of this stuff, you have to stand back and go, how does this possibly continue? I mean, how can possibly all these people still be employed? Now, okay, it gets tricky. I think there's a lot of good that many people do in the name of their religion. It has nothing to do with their dogma. It has to do with feeling good about taking care of people when you know that people need to be taken care of. That we have, as organisms, a sense of sociality that runs so deep that there is a genuine feeling of meaning, and it feels good to help another in need when you know you have resources and you know you are relevantly situated to actually help a person. I think most of us, we run to that opportunity. There is a genuine mattering, and I think we can feel it. And so I think there are a lot of people who, religious or not, they gain a good amount of meaning from taking care of, well, the sick, the elderly, the people who are disenfranchised. There are a lot of ways in which food, kitchens, and shelters, especially during very hard times, these are needed. And I think we don't want to throw out the spiritual baby with the phony baloney bathwater. I mean, I think there's a lot of dogma that's suspicious, but I think something about the human being does have meaning horizons open to it that give a real sense of satisfaction and gratification in helping others. And so that's partly why it persists. So I don't want to deny that. I think that so people have feelings that they gain. And it also comes from, I guess, just people maybe don't believe a lot of the dogma. They're like, oh, who cares how many angels dance on a head of a pin, but let's get together and sing in church. So there's this kind of, again, this different level of meaning horizon that people are opening to when they're singing there, and they're feeling community and they're feeling fellowship, and they're sort of losing themselves into something larger than themselves. In this case, just a kind of collective that I think those are part of what, make it persist, continue without too much buckling. But I think the more you think about it, and again, I think those are certainly significant reasons. But I think the more you think about it, the more you end up with something like, I think the reason it persists, and again with the popes and the different popes, the Eastern Orthodox, you got the different clergy, all these different levels, all these guys who are in their 80s, 90s, devoted their life to the priesthood, they're cardinals somewhere. How does this all persist? I think it persists mainly because none of us have a clue on where all this came from. there is the most profound mystery of mysteries. And we all, oh yeah, you can go and find no shortage of theories about how it began. I mean, not only are there origin stories across the world and filled with myths, but even the contemporary scientists. I mean, the latest scientists are going to argue about whether or not the Big Bang was the first Big Bang, or is it the most recent of an infinity of bangs and crunches and bangs and crunches. You know, when he gets down, is it loops? Is it strings? Is it foam? I mean, there's a certain point at which we go, no one's really sure. Now we could say, well, it's 14.x billion years, and here's how old the Earth is. And I think those are useful, but we're still not going to ever get to something like, why did all of this happen? Like, not just simply from where did it come, but in coming from wherever it did, what was its purpose? Why is it here? Now, we might say those don't really make sense scientifically. Okay, maybe they don't. Maybe why questions phrased that way just don't have ways for us to do experiments and or ways to produce the kind of evidence that would answer them. Doesn't mean that they're illegitimate questions. In fact, they may be some of the most legitimate questions, even though they don't have answers, or they don't have answers of the scientific sort. All right. I mean, it could be the answer is that for unknown and unknowable reasons, somehow this began from nothing. It could be that there was a kind of paradoxical substance which as only one thing couldn't even be itself because there was nothing to delimit or relate to. And in order to resolve its kind of non-status as just one, introduced some kind of division that created everything that is. And it's expanding in an effort to handle whatever it is it introduced and did. And none of it has to be volitional or intentional. It could just be an orderliness akin to implicates in mathematics, correlates, right? If I speak about a particular algorithm and things that would be entailed or implied by that particular algorithm once we have an initial input, you know, I think there are ways of getting at orderliness itself as intelligent without talking about an organism or a being that, quotes, is intelligent. I think the long short of it is, though, that religions will continue to have quite a hold. And because I think they're willing to address people where they're at, which is this question, what is all of this? Where did it all come from? And see, none of us are born with an owner's manual. You know, we don't know all this stuff. Like it's, you know, why are we affected by the moon? And to what extent are we? Why does the placebo effect work in some ways? You know, why do women have synchronized periods when they start to cohabitate? You know, why aren't you supposed to feed babies honey? You know, like we could give, again, perhaps robust scientific answers to these questions. But I think the more that we do, the more that those answers shed serious questions on some of our notions of identity. Well, then we're not the discrete little organisms that the visual field would give us. You know, when I look at you in the visual field, when I look at myself, like here in a camera or in front of a mirror, I look like just a discrete body that's self-contained at the sack of skin, and I'm just wholly present there. But when we start to look at all of the different relations that we have to others and to the world, you know, to atmosphere, to gravitational constants, to the way that, you know, the moon affects behavior, or the way that sunlight affects people's moods, the way that bodies can be more or less synchronized, subject to each other's stresses. Yeah, those may be more or less scientific questions, but they certainly pose massive problems for the kind of illusion of atomistic individualism that I think some of the, contemporary communication technologies have ushered in. Money and literacy in particular, the two great detribalizers. I mean, human beings are fundamentally tribal organisms, but we've been detribalized by communication technologies that have given the illusion that the individual is self-contained and discrete and then somehow forms societies, something like this. Again, I think people have a very strange notion sometimes of even who they are. And I think that's part of the question. When we ask, who am I, in an ultimate sense, we're not asking like, what's my name or my occupation? We're trying to say, of all of what is that which is, that includes me, so that I can understand who I am really in an ultimate sense. Right? Now, as I say, I think mystery isn't going to go away. And it's, for me in the book anyway, mystery is one of the exemplars of non-being haunting being. And I think humans experience mystery, that they know they don't know. They know that something is beyond an answer, and yet they suffer with the question. I don't know if other organisms have that. Now, maybe they do. Again, I don't know. It's a mystery. Now, maybe that's a scientific question. We could ask, to what degree do other organisms experience mystery? My guess is that the human being is the most open in its sense of mystery. Not only is it the most open in its temporal expanse to the mystery of what will come at the ultimate end of the cosmos, something like this, heat, death, end of it all, or the end of their own lives, or they can ask all the way to, where did they come from? Where did their grandparents come from? Where did the cosmos come from? And it's riddled with mystery. And we're little animals chattering noises. We tell stories and we take our stories very seriously, but nobody really knows. We're taking our best guesses. We take a best guess and we extrapolate. Even incredible books like Harari's Sapiens, it's just such a wonderful book, which he does such a great job in talking about the interesting relationship between the state and the individual, and how the state, strong state, ends up liberating out individuals in a way that I think some libertarian philosophies have underestimated. At any rate, even a book like that, so learned, so deeply studied in laying out the nature of the human at a lot of different levels of analysis, stresses they're stories. They're our best guess of patching things together. Now, I guess I wanted to maybe follow this out a little bit more. And maybe I'll try to wrap up with this story. And I'm going to say again, please, people, go get the book, get it in your library. Let me know if you want to form a reading group. If you can get people, I would say 5 people. You get 5 people who are interested in doing a reading group, whether they're having just library copies or their own copy. I will try my best to make an arrangement to come, and you can all, grill me, or we can talk about the book, and you want to ask me questions or whatever. I'd be happy to come to your reading group and or talk more about the book. I'm really excited about so many of these ideas. Okay, so I was thinking a lot. I was recently talking with somebody, and they were asking me about the divisiveness in the culture today. I said, our culture is just so divisive. There's so many problems that are going on, and I agree. I think, the culture does seem very divisive, and we could give all kinds of reasons for it. I think there are many, many reasons, right? And I don't want to go into all of them. I think Leon Fessinger's work on When Prophecy Fails and to try to study cognitive dissonance work, I think that's a really helpful area to get at some of this. Identity formation and, defense mechanisms. And, there's a lot of psychoanalysis that would be relevant as well. People need to realize that they're often deceived by their own motives, and that, sometimes we're not as transparent to ourselves as we like to believe. I think people like Daniel Kahneman's work has been really good at showing, some of the critiques of the rational decision maker model, or the degree to which we're all fully in control of ourselves and this sort of stuff. And so again, I think people are they're driven by more situational factors, social factors. And, you know, in some way, I think it is fair to say that a lot of the new media, particularly these social media sites, have really created a lot of antagonism. You know, people doing pooflinging in ways that they would never do if they were face to face with people. And then the more hostile the online environment is, the more that normalizes that. And then that drifts over into real life. So I think there's a lot of factors. But that said, in the context of what I've been working on, you know, over this last couple of years on this project, I was thinking about the very belief, and I think it's widely held here. Please, people, get in on this. I think it's widely held. People believe, I think a good number of them, now maybe not many, maybe more. We have to have to haggle on how many, but a lot of people, they actually believe in heaven and hell. In heaven and hell. Now, first off, I want to say, you know, some of this was couched in my thinking of, I'd heard a Sean Carroll interview Sapolsky, how do you say his name? The guy at Stanford who does all this interesting evolutionary biology stuff. He has a massive book out called Behave. And he was saying he's a hardline incompatibilist. You know, he doesn't really buy any form of freedom. And I didn't really understand some of his argument because I wanted to say, well, science certainly requires something like agency. I mean, you're setting up experiments, you're deciding whether or not the hypothesis was adequately phrased, whether or not the design of the experiment is efficient and going to be, you know, will the way it's arranged be sufficient for controlling what you want to control in order to get the kind of evidence you want to have. So it seemed a little bit like I wasn't understanding what he was saying. At any rate, I found it to be very interesting because he was basically saying no one's really responsible for anything because we're so subject to so many different factors. And I mean, I think his point seemed to be that too many people are specialists and reductive, and they go to one little area where they go, oh, it was the brain, or oh, it was how they were raised, or oh, it was their sugar level that day, or oh, it was some other factor. And he wants to say, well, it's so many different factors all at once that people just really aren't the agents that they take themselves to believe. And I thought, okay, yeah, no, that's very interesting. And when I think about that, I would say, yes, all of us have been influenced by countless things. People have had head injuries. People have had more or less nutritive diets when they were young. People have had more or less nurturing and caring parents. So many people, you know, the luck of the draw of who their parents were and how encouraging, loving, and supportive they were, or how abusive and neglectful, and how all of those things shape in countless ways what we do, how we think, our assumptions, which then again feed into what we do, how we think. So it's a whole complex congregate of factors and forces, causes that are going on. And once you take all that into account, the happenstance, the luck, the chance, the where we were born, everything else, and then you say, okay, you're still going to believe in heaven and hell. In heaven and hell. So you think there is some person who is so good that they deserve to have a life of bliss, a life of I guess, ultimate salvation, there at the foot of God, somehow basking in the beauty of the divine visage. Other people, so bad that they deserve eternal damnation. I mean, what if it's the case that there's no person who is so good as to deserve heaven, and there's no person who's so bad as to deserve hell? That is, it's our partial knowledge of the situation, our very limited vantage that allows that to make sense. And think of what that does to the divisiveness in the culture. Once you start to think of people as going to heaven and hell, and you're just walking around in public places and you're going, well, that person's going to heaven, that person's going to hell, they're going to heaven, they're going to hell. Oh, me, my friends, oh yes, we're all going to heaven. And then you start to think about, like, what is the math on all of that? So some person who is perhaps Jewish has lived a great life, lots of concern, but they don't accept Jesus. Now they're going to hell. But some other person who was rapist, criminal, savage, stab and grab, greed, did all kinds of criminal activity, but in the midnight hour, they accept Jesus as their Lord, and they, in a confession, deathbed confession, they get into heaven. I think now it's funny. I think there's some people are going to go, oh, well, we don't know enough about heaven and what the rules are and all this kind of stuff. Why not just say none of that makes sense? There's no heaven. There's no hell. There's no life after death. Now, I guess I'm going to have to get into this last topic that we'll see. I want to talk about psychedelics. I've heard so many people suggest that by their psychedelic drug use, they now have evidence that there's life after death, that they've seen spirits, they've talked to dead people, there's all this kind of stuff. Okay, boy. I'm not wholly naive on what it is people are talking about. I think many people, though, and some of this is difficult. People have had very different experiences, and there's such a range of experiences. You're not sure what experiences different people have had. Now, for me, the most blanket thing to say would be all of this is hearsay of the living to the living. Some person was alive, they did a drug, they had an experience, and they reported to something else. How that says anything about life after death is beyond me. I mean, I feel sort of that way about near-death experience studies. And, when I look at that kind of stuff, yes, maybe they just weren't fully dead yet. And we say, well, they weren't clinically dead yet. And then we have all these definitions about what do we mean by dead. And, when a person comes back, say a week after being dead, they're clawing out of the grave or something, I'd be like, well, okay, well, that'd be an interesting case. That someone was dead and they came back and they could tell us. But even if the person was, clinically dead for hours or something like this, there may be enough complex neurochemistry and processes still going on in the brain that can account for a good amount of some of these phenomena. I don't see any of them as sufficient evidence for the fact of life after death. Now, when people do a heavy psychedelic drug, say something like DMT, salvia divinorum, ayahuasca, when they do a serious drug, you could be put into a state that is so instantaneously like being knocked into a dream. And when you have a dream, you can have agencies and other people, perhaps dead people talk to you, people who have long since been deceased. So I would have to hear someone differentiate that to say that they're not just in a different kind of dream-enabled waking state, that in some way the drug blurs the line between what it means to be awake and what it means to be dreaming, and how the dream itself can, all dreams themselves, they introduce these kinds of internal divisions, these forms of knot that allow me to experience things as a certain thing, even though they're not what they are, right? I mean, when somebody comes up to me in a dream and says something that surprises the me in the dream, when I wake up, I can realize that I wasn't the me in the dream. I was everyone in the dream. I was the dream itself. Right. So again, inside the dream, there are forms of negation, forms of separation that allow for an experience of otherness to occur, even though it was me producing that. Now, I think what's more likely to happen, and this happens with, I think, as a lot of people say, that they're no longer fearful of death once they've had a traumatic or a dramatic psychedelic experience. So a person takes a very potent psychedelic drug and they experience what's sometimes called ego death. That is, could be a relatively short time in a very strong hallucinogen like salvia or DMT, where like suddenly everything that one took to be reality isn't that at all. And it's like having, your third eye be squeegee opened and all of reality drops like a onesie. And you realize that everything that you'd taken to be reality was a certain kind of construction that your brain had organized. And that itself is this like discovery that there is a kind of I other than the ego and the way the ego had come to believe itself as, the little temporal manifestation that you are, with this particular identity in this particular place. But the discovery that consciousness has a wild range, and that it's been caged and curtailed and somewhat packaged and formed into a cultural mode, and then largely plays out its days in those mold unless it's played with or toyed with by various, meditative techniques, or again, psychedelic drug experiences. None of that tells me anything about life after death for me. I mean, I think somebody can have, again, a very profound experience of ego death, and at first maybe it does seem as if, like, you have this sense of, you no longer fear death, like there's something after death. But the expression is making sense, because the death you had undergone is the death of the entire world that you knew as you and your world and your life. And as that liquidated, you go, oh yeah, there's definitely something beyond all that. Yeah, in life, I think while you're alive, you can entertain what life is like for the dead. I don't think the dead entertain what is life for the living. Right? There's an asymmetry there, right? That will, and what this really means, I just think about it. It's an absolutely beautiful thought. I mean, life is a kind of mystery that only opens to itself from the inside. It's all inside. It's sort of like when we say it, like metaphysically, we say, well, if the universe is infinitely expanding, what's it expanding into? Isn't that just more universe? Well, somehow we have to have this concept to know there isn't more universe. There's some sort of edge that it's breaking into. And in the same way, we have this notion, we have to postulate it, that there is a kind of outside to life, although for the living, there really isn't. We literally, you didn't come into the world, you've come out of it. You've grown out of another person, literally. I mean, you literally have grown out of a person. There's a huge chain of being, of organisms coming out of other organisms of their same kind. But as you came to birth, that original partition, I mean, it separated you off. And yet you really didn't come to self-consciousness till much later. That is, it was probably at least a year, 2.5 years, when you were flashing in and out and suddenly realized that you were you, and you realized you had a name and you had a family, and that whole awareness of the larger world was starting to crystallize and gel in. And so in some sense, you were well before you knew that you were. And so like your self-knowledge, your sense of ego, your sense of self, of you and the world that you're in, that grew out of a whole bunch of organismal anonymous processes, sort of like the you who grows your hair, the you who digests your food, the you who can heal a wound, all of that kind of stuff is sort of, again, is going on. And then there's this conscious ego self that grew out of that, again, around 2.5, something like that. Again, there's latitudes, maybe earlier, maybe later. But on the other end of that, it'll be like, I'm dying. You won't ever get to, I'm dead. Oh, I'm dead. Wow, I finally made it. I'm dead. No, you won't ever get to I'm dead. If you're saying I'm dead, you're not dead yet. You're not dead. You're still alive. And so in that sense, life is this odd Mobius strip. It just rolls inwardly, and it only knows itself from the inside. There is no outside of life. It would require the dead to be aware, to be able to provide the frame for life to have a whole from outside of itself. But no, the whole of life is always incomplete on both ends, right? And it makes sense. I mean, our bodies are basically alimentary canals flowing through the liver, flowing through the river of life. I mean, you're like a walking straw. And I mean, not only do you have, like, again, this hole at the top and hole at the bottom, and you're sort of walking through, but as you're walking through, you're not only shedding all of the skin on your outside, you're shedding layers on the inside. You're a continuous rivering as you're flowing through a much larger river, right? You're a little eddy or a stream. Okay, people, I hope everyone is well. Please think about a reading group. Let me know. I'm going to post a 30% off discount for the book at the publisher. I'm also going to post a link to a directory of libraries. Please chainmail this. Get as many people as you can to get the book in their local libraries. People can start grabbing them. I would love to start forming reading groups and try to create a space for people who are, I guess, wanting to find something like a spirituality of fellowship and trying to take better care of one another. That is, when you look to one another, this is the place where agency matters. This is the place where we can have compassion and care. It's not some judgment for some afterlife, and it's not an illusion. No, what we do matters, and it matters here. It matters for this life because people are here and people matter. And I would love to talk more with people about it. So look for that directory, look for those codes, and do what you can. I would love to have people help promote me here. Okay, thank you.